Today's guest is an author, illustrator, and UFO researcher. His book, The Messengers, Owls, Synchronicity, and the UFO Abductee, indicates how owls play a part in the UFO phenomenon. Intriguing to be sure. Please give a massive Koit welcome to Mike Clelland. KoitCast! Hi Mike, and welcome to KoitCast.
Thank you so much. It's my honor to be here.
No worries, it's a pleasure to have you here. I suppose the old classic is, can you tell us a little bit about yourself and what got you into the paranormal theatre, so to speak? Your origin story.
My origin story here, let me just take a sip of coffee because this is going to take a little talking. So I have been studying the combination of UFOs and owls, the co-joined overlap of UFOs and owls, and I am astonished that I am on this life path right now because I never would have expected it. So people kind of ask me, so how did you choose this? And my answer correctly is I did not choose this. It chose me. This mystery chose me. And so let's turn the clock back about 17 years ago. Good grief, that's a long time. So around 2000, be 17 years ago. So 2006, I was living in Idaho, right near Yellowstone National Park. And there's another national park. They're beautiful. Oh God, it was a glorious place. Right near Grand Teton National Park. So I had a big wilderness right out my back door.
Oh,
and I was working for an outdoor school. I was teaching outdoor skills. I would spend my summers in Alaska. And so I came back down from Alaska to the lower 48, and this would have been in the fall, the autumn. I don't have the exact date. It was either late September or early October, and the weather is glorious at that time of year. So I met a woman that worked at the same school I did. The school had a branch in this very small town. And she had been there all summer. She had been what's called in town working for the school, where you deal with the backpacks and the food and the rations and the students that come in. So I said, wow, you've been here all summer. You must have camped all the time. You have the Tetons and Yellowstone right in your backyard. You must have been out in the mountains all the time. And she said, I haven't camped once. And I said, oh, well, that's terrible. That's terrible. That's unforgivable. I'm going to take you camping. We're going to go out for one night. And we did. We went out for one night camping. This was sort of a first date, which in a camping culture like that is pretty normal. So we went with very light backpacks, did not take a tent. Yeah. We're going to go out for one night, and this weather was wonderful. So you can kind of gauge the weather just by looking to the eastern sky or the western sky. And we left in the afternoon, and we were going to spend one night out. So with a light backpack, we went way into the mountains, and we were at this beautiful, glorious spot, high in the mountains. And I was totally in my element. I'd been out working all summer long, and I was completely in my element. And I was sitting on a big flat rock with this woman. Her name is Kristen. We're still close friends. And she was talking about something. Now this detail is important. So she was talking about something, and I was all of a sudden struck. I was like, oh my word, this is a much smarter person. This person has much more depth than I thought. And at that moment, an owl flew over us.
How close?
And then another owl, and then a third owl. And so for the next 2 hours, these three owls flew around us. They landed on the ground near us. They kind of landed on trees near us. They swooped right over us. And this was as the sun was setting and as we finished dinner. So in bear country, what you do is you don't want to eat or sleep where you cook. So we just put everything back in the backpack, and we were light gear. We didn't have much. So we just walked another mile or so, and the owls followed us. And then we found a spot to lie down to sleep for the night. And we laid our sleeping bags and our pads down just under the stars on the ground. And looking up, the owls would swoop right over our faces. So this is the northern Rockies at a high elevation in a pristine area way far away from any city. So the nighttime sky is mind-blowing. And the owls would cross paths right in front of our faces. And they would they're very silent in flight. So it was this very strange, eerie thing. And it just blotted out the stars for just a blink. And the next morning we were like, wow, that was pretty cool. And I said, hey, that was wonderful. Let's go camping again sometime. And she said, great, anytime. So 4 days later, I called her up and said, let's go. And she said, I'm going. So we went out for one night. We went to a completely different part of the mountains. And as the sun was setting, I said, let's climb that hill and get a view of the sunset. So we climbed. It was a 5-minute walk up. And we were above tree line. So it's forested down lower. So there's no trees at a certain elevation. So we just walked up this hilltop and got a beautiful view of the sunset. As the sun was setting, 3 owls came near us. Now, the first time, 4 days earlier, these owls were kind of over there on a branch, or they were kind of way over there. They would land, but not this time. The one owl landed at our feet. And I just can so clearly remember Kristen's face of just astonishment, just like this was, to have it happen once was pretty cool. To have it happen twice with the same person 4 days later. Now I'm convinced it's the same 3 owls. There's no way I can prove that, but I was just like, this is the same 3 owls. Now these are short-eared owls, which is a very common kind of owl. They'd be about 10 inches tall. So they're not anything intimidating or imposing. They were cute and very playful. And wow, was it mystical. So I wrote this up as a diary entry at the time and stuff like that. And what happened in the moment, I did not talk about, where there was seeing the 3 owls both nights. I had a very clear thought in my head, like a voice in my head that said, this has something to do with the UFOs. Now, so I'm looking at a real owl.
And that voice, though, was that your conscience telling you that, or did you hear something else?
You know what? I can't really answer that. I could play it both ways. I feel like I could honestly give you both answers. I could say, yes, it was my conscience. It was just an internal part of myself. And I could also say, like, wow, it was heavy. It might have been some other voice. So
sure,
whatever it was weighted with this urgency, this kind of drama. It felt like this voice was saying, this has something to do with the UFOs. Like it was stern, that inner voice. Now, after that, both Kristen and I were like, it was both of us were on fire to try to figure out what the owl thing meant. Now, in my life leading up to that point, I would have been 2006, I would have been 44 years old, and I'm 60 now. And in that chapter, leading up to that chapter, I had in my youth a series of what amounted to UFO events. I had seen a flying craft in the nighttime sky very clearly. I had a missing time event with an associated, what felt to me like a bright orange flash in the sky. A friend of mine that I was with, I was 12 years old, I was young, but the friend of mine told me later, he said, we saw a UFO. And I was like, I never saw a UFO. I saw an orange flash in the sky. I got home and I was 2 hours late. So there's 2 hours of missing time. My parents were angry at me. So, and then I also had an experience when I was 30, where I woke up in the middle of the night and saw 5 classic gray aliens, the spindly, skinny bodies with the great big head and the big black eyes, walking towards the house. I woke up in bed, looked out the window, and saw these walking towards the house. And I had a voice in my head. This was also a similar voice where it was like kind of like a stern voice, like, and it said, excuse me, it said, it said, oh yes, they're here. Now is the time to put your head on the pillow and shut down. And that's exactly what I did. So I had those events in my life. I pushed them away. I dismissed it all. I wasn't going there. I was not going to deal with this. And then when the thing with the owls happened, as a 44-year-old man, I was like, I got to look into this. So I started a blog. I started reaching out to UFO researchers. And so the story I told with Kristen was one of the very first, I think it was the second blog post I put on my blog back in 2009. So that would have been 3 years later. And I wrote it up, and I wrote the thing where like she was talking about something. And I reached out to her after I published it. She had moved out of the valley. We were still close. I called her up on the phone. I said, hey, Kristen, what were we talking about the very first night when we saw the very first owl? I remember we were talking about something. What were we talking about? And she said, oh, I remember exactly what we were talking about. I was giving my most heartfelt definition of what God means to me.
Right.
Now I'm like not at all churchy, but I recognize like the mythic power in that statement. So I was on fire trying to make sense of this stuff. And I started writing articles about owls in their connection to UFO and started talking to people. And everyone I would talk to, I would ask the same question. Like I would talk to a researcher and I would say, hey, do you have any stories with owls? And say, oh yeah, we got lots of stories with owls. And I would talk to, and they would say, hey, you should talk to this person who had the direct experience. Here's their phone number. And so I was very quickly put into this network of people, and I would ask everyone the same question. And it wasn't 100%, but it was enough that there was a pattern. I would say, hey, have you ever had any odd experiences with owls? And I would hear the weirdest stories. They would say, no one's ever asked me that. Like, and oh my word, I was just overwhelmed with the strangest, most mythic accounts. So I started collecting them and archiving them. And very quickly, back around 2009, if you Googled UFO owl, I was the first thing that came up. And on my website, I would say, I want to hear your stories. So people started sending me their stories. I was getting them sort of as a trickle at a point. I got 5 yesterday. I got 5 good, powerful owl stories in connection. Not all of them are in connection with UFOs, but I got 5 powerful owl stories yesterday.
Literally yesterday. Yeah.
Yesterday. Like, and that's a lot. So it's usually around 1 a day. I get a lot where people just say, hey, I saw a pretty owl on the fence. And it's like, that's all well and good. That doesn't kind of fit into but the people are just reaching out to me, but I get a lot of those. But so I've been flooded with stories. I've been trying to archive them and collate them and make sense of what patterns are emerging. And I've been putting them out in books and I certainly talk about them in podcasts. I had my own podcast for years. And so I've been trying to make sense of these accounts, and it's a very difficult question to answer. Like, why are the owls connected to the UFO contact experience?
Yeah, I imagine it is, because unless you have an answer, you kind of can't give one. Do you know what I mean? And to get the answer, you need to be with them.
You can dance around it. You can speculate on all kinds of things. That doesn't mean you know it. Yeah. So, I mean, but there is some connection. And then I will also say this is something that more so in the last few years, I really feel strongly about this. Owls are also, I get a lot of stories about owls connected with death, usually the death of a parent. I get lots of owl stories in connection with meditation. People will meditate. They'll literally close their eyes and then open their eyes, and there'll be an owl staring at them in the window so owls and meditation. I get a lot of stories about owls and psychedelics, mushrooms in particular. And then I get stories of owls and shamanic initiation, like people going through. There's shaman is kind of like it's in our Western culture, we don't really have a role for the shaman, but they're still out there. There's still a community of people doing that, whether they're doing it through in, let's say, tribal situations or cultural situations where that's more accepted, like in the Native American lore or the Native American population or in Siberia. And there's places that are still doing shamanic work actively. And within those cultures, the owl is well understood that they will arrive and make themselves known at the time of an initiate going through the process to become a shaman. So I would call and then synchronicities, like powerful synchronicities, are often folded into the owl event. So I have been arguing that the owl is not necessarily connected to the UFO. The UFO is a part of the hub of that wheel would be the highly charged human experience. And then there's multiple things that are connected with that. And owls seem to show up in connection with those. So I would say the UFO contact experience is undoubtedly a highly charged human experience, but so is also a powerful meditative experience or a powerful psychedelic experience or death, in the family.
So this throws up a couple of questions for me before we go back and hit some of the things you said. I know there's a whole screen memory thing associated with owls, which we'll touch on a bit later. But so is the owl then a portent of something important happening? Is that how we're seeing it?
So I would say it's an alarm clock. So I would argue it's a less of a portent of something about to happen and more of I would say the owl is the totem. It represents the transformational process. And this is coming from having boiled down thousands of reports.
Sure.
I wish I had like a staff of 10 that could collate all my archives. I don't. I'm just one person. So I'm just anecdotally boiling these down. So I would say less that it's a portent of something about to happen. So it's not foreshadowing something. It is more if it's portent of anything, it's a portent of the transformational process, as opposed to something. Some folklore is very morbid and very dark and sinister, and so the owl plays this kind of sinister role. And in fiction, and like Shakespeare, for instance, there's points in Macbeth as well as in Julius Caesar, I think, where the owl will hoot and then the character will die in the play.
Yeah.
And that's part of our lore. I have not found that in the reports I'm getting. It's certainly in fiction and it's certainly in the folklore. I have not found that directly in any meaningful way in my research. So,
have you this is a slight aside here, but have you ever watched Star Wars Rebels cartoon? Has anyone ever reported that to you?
No.
Well, there's a chap who writes that and sort of like directs it and stuff. It's called Dave Filoni, and he uses owls in that, like a space owl, so to speak, to signify portents and change, wisdom and change. So it's obviously out there in the ether, isn't it, that this is what owls truly are, a point in someone's life where something big's going to happen or it puts you onto a different path. And that's obviously what seems to have happened in your case.
Very much so. So I was looking at a real owl. I had a voice in my head that said this has something to do with UFOs. They were conjoined. I thought nothing of it. I thought, what an odd little thing. I was going to ask a few people, and I figured it would just I'd come get some little answer and then move on. But that was 16 years ago, and I haven't moved on. I've been obsessed with it since then. I will also say that it's been incredibly fruitful in the sense that like this one little thread, right? So the UFO field is this giant, like it's like there's so much in it, conspiracies and government and psychic stuff and new age stuff and very grounded nuts and bolts stuff. But within that is this thin little sliver of this giant of owls. And I just pull on that thinnest little thread. And what I'm finding is it is so rich. It is so rich. And it is, how to say this, like I would have, like the campfire story, the spooky campfire story that just had a little eeriness to it and just had a kind of a presence to it and a symbolic mythos to it and an eeriness to it. I loved that as a kid. And I love that now. And that is what the owl and UFO story is feeding me, that mysterious nugget.
Yes. And I have a further question on this scenario about our desire for answers, and that mystery, always attacking a mystery. I want to go into that later because I think it's valid for most humans in theory. I want to, before we hit your three things that you said, the aliens coming at you at your house, clearly that's something I don't want to miss, so we'll put a pin in that one. But can you give us some stories or cases that people have brought to you regarding owls, and then obviously in connection with the UFO phenomenon, if you can give them? You don't have to give them names.
I got thousands of them, but yeah. So the problem is some of them are tough to tell. So I'm actually drawn more to lately to the ones that don't involve the UFO. But I could. So this is one of the very first ones that came to me. A fellow named Derek was camping in the desert, and I've become pretty good friends with him. Right, we've met up a few times when I've traveled to New York, and he was with a friend. They were in the desert, and at the top of a cactus, as the sun it was dark, at the top of a cactus, they looked up and there was an owl looking down at them. And it gave them both him and his friend both got this kind of really unsettled feeling, like, ooh, something's up. And the owl flew off. And then moments later, a triangle craft absolutely silently flew over them and moved in this very strange way. He struggled to describe how it traveled through the canyon or how it hugged the terrain. And you could just see him like fighting, like this was not any kind of normal aircraft. This was not a helicopter. This was not a plane. So he gets, owl, boom, UFO, boom, simultaneously, in essence.
Mm-hmm.
And then and then I talked to him, what's going on in your life? How's things going? He said, well, I had this happen. And he saw another UFO, which was a dot in the sky, which is a little elusive, a couple days later. And and we talked about like what was going on in his life. And he said, after all this and this happened and that happened, and I had a spiritual awakening. And I'm like, really? Okay. And then, so I pay attention to that. Like I kind of ask that of people. So this is a recognized pattern within the research. It doesn't get talked about enough much, but people will have a UFO sighting, just a sighting. And then at some point they will have a spiritual awakening. This is kind of a murky one, but it's one that fascinates me. It's a tough one to pin down. So I do ask those questions of people. How's your spirituality changed? So that's a short one that I can tell. I got lots more if you want more.
Before we move on to another one, I do want to hear more, by the way, as many as we can get through. Did he give you an explanation of what his spiritual awakening entailed or became?
Not so much, but he basically said he changed as a person, and when I met him, he was a very, there's a type of person that I call a seeker, that really represents the people who are having these owl and UFO experiences. That's a tough thing that's just my own anecdotal thing. People will ask me like, don't you think you have confirmation bias? And I'm like, of course I do. Like, yeah, of course I do. Like, I'm totally like, I'm one thing, I'm studying one thing. It's me. I'm trying to make sense of my own direct experiences. So yes, absolutely. Like I'm just you. If you're reading my research, you better dang well know I am not an objective researcher. I'm a completely subjective researcher. So, but your question was, did I know? Like, no, it's very difficult. Some people can give me, I know one woman who just gave up her life and joined a Buddhist monastery. So that would be a very concrete answer to the change. She shaved her head. Yeah. So she shaved her head and wore orange robes and chanted all day. Yeah. So.
Interesting. So that's Derek with his triangle and his cactus owl. And obviously in that case, that was just a hint that something was going to happen. Have you got another one that you think is probably the best ever case that is linked to UFOs or even abductions, say?
I've got a lot of great cases that are, but they take a long time to tell. Okay. So here's a real quick one. So this doesn't have this. There's no UFO in this one, but it does sort of convey the mystery. So a guy contacts me and he says, I got this great job. I you know what I do? I wax the floors. I polish the floors at the grocery store. It's great. I can get up early. The store's empty. It's an easy job. By 7 o'clock in the morning, I'm done. And then the rest of my day is free. So he drives in the dark to the grocery store and does this. But there was an every day on the way to work, while it's night and while the stars are out, he stops at a field, parks his car, gets out in the field, and then basically prays in the field. And he says, how can I be of service to the world? How can I better understand the universe? It's basically his prayer, his meditation. And then one day it's like, this is in New England in the East Coast, and it's like freaking cold in the winter there. So it's like 20 below zero or something like that. I don't know what that is. Cold as it freaking yeah. So he's driving and he's like, I'm not getting out today. I'm not going. And so he turns the corner, and there's like, he thought it was a paper bag in the road, and there's something right in the road, and it like all of a sudden it turns, it faces him, and he sees this two owl eyes looking at him, and it's this little cute owl, and then bam, he runs it over. Thump thump. Ugh. Feels it go under both tires. And stops the car and gets out, and he runs around, he looks for feathers, looks for blood, nothing. Runs back behind him, there's nothing. There's no evidence at all that there was an owl. He looks around, and he's at the spot where he was supposed to meditate. So he's out of the car. And it was so for me, that's like a little poetic kind of twist to the story, where it's like you're not getting out of your practice. So that's a very subtle story. These are what I'm finding, these very poetic. There's a term that's used by philosophers and stuff like that, but I love it. It's called mythopoetic. So there's like this mythopoetic element to this story that I'm finding. That's the consistency that I'm finding, and that's the thread that I want to pull on, that sort of dream language that shows up in these stories.
So again, it seems to be reinforcing the point. It's sort of like a path change, a slight nudge, so to speak.
Sometimes not so slight nudge. Yeah. Sometimes you get hit over the head with a
Yeah, in that case, obviously that was a slight nudge because you're saying no, you ain't missing your day. Because
Yeah.
if he had have missed that day and that wasn't that experience, could he have missed the next day and then the next day and then he's completely out of his pattern?
Yeah. Yeah,
You know,
exactly.
that's the potential. Got another one? Want to whack us with another?
Oh, here's one that's a little longer. This one,
Cool.
this one I got recently, and it really touched me. This woman pulls into her driveway. She's talking on the phone. She's talking to her father on the phone. She pulls in the driveway. There's an owl in the driveway. She parks the car. She gets out of the car. She calls her son, who's in the house. Come out, come out, come out. Look, there's a big owl in the driveway. The owl flies up to a branch. The son comes out. The owl flies from the branch and touches her hair. And her son is like, Mom, are you okay? And she's like, oh, it was so gentle. It was so gentle. So an owl touches her head. And then later, so leading up to this,
Right.
she had gone to a baseball game. We have little league baseball games here. The kids play baseball in the parks and stuff. And so parents and moms and stuff like that are in those little stands there. So she just turns to this person in the stands, just another parent of a kid playing baseball, someone she really didn't know, and said, what's going on? And the woman says, I'm in this terrible thing. I need a kidney. I need a kidney transplant. Basically, or I'll die.
Mm.
And the lady, without skipping a beat, says, I'll give you mine. And the woman says, no, it doesn't work like that. It's not that easy. We have to be compatible. You have to go to the doctor. You have to get a blood test. There's some tests that are involved to see if you're compatible. I would reject it if it wasn't. And she says, I'll take the test. So she went to the doctor and took the test. And the doctor came, it was sometime later, the doctor got back to her and said, well, I'm looking at the results of the test. Is this your sister? And she goes, no. She said, that's really interesting. I was going to ask if it's your twin sister. The doctor says, no. Or she says to the doctor, no, it's just a lady in the neighborhood. So also at the same little point in her life, she was hiking on a trail. And she hikes with a friend, and there was a friend where she has it's basically their spiritual friend, she says, and they talk about mystical things and spiritual things in the trail. And as they got back to the car, it was getting dark. So when they got to the car, it was dark. And when they got to the parking lot, they looked up and there was a series of lights going over. And she said she could see a structured craft. She got a picture of it. There's not much to see. It looks like some dots.
Yeah.
But so there's a UFO. She sees an unidentified craft. She said it moved very strangely. And then she said something which I only heard a few times. She said, you know what? Everything in the parking lot turned red. The trees turned red. All the cars turned red. The asphalt turned red. Everything turned red. And she has pictures of it. Now, to be honest, the pictures are kind of weird. It looks like the asphalt is made of cherry licorice or something, but it could have done that just with digital
filter or something.
So I did. Yeah. So I was I was listening more to the tone of her voice when she told me this story. So, wow, okay. So we got owl and UFO. And I said, hey, so what was going on here's the questions I ask. What was going on in the lead up to your event, whether it's an owl event or a UFO event? What happened afterwards? So leading up to the owl event, what was happening? She said, I was on the phone talking to my father. I was saying, I'm going to give my kidney away. And that was right as the owl touched her head. Moments later, the owl touched her head. Afterward, she gave her kidney up and she's doing fine. Her neighbor's in perfect health. So here's again this story that plays out in dream logic. It has that mythopoetic mood or feel to it. So one of the questions I ask people who have these experiences, I said, do you have any healing abilities? It's not 100%, but people say, oh yeah, I can put my hands on my wife was going through chemotherapy, this one guy said, and I could put my hands on her and alleviate her pain. And so there's this, here's another odd thing. When I talk to people on the phone, I have a clipboard. I just write down some notes and stuff like that. I don't write down much, but in case they call back or we talk again, I can refer back to those notes. And I always write in the corner of the page, I said, write Reiki. You know what Reiki therapy is?
Yes, yeah.
Yeah. So a hands-on or hands-off, you'd actually tend not to touch the patient, a hands-off form of energy healing. And I just put it right Reiki in the corner. And I just wait. And then at the end of the talk, hey, what are you doing for work? Usually they'll tell me beforehand, or what's going on in your life? And she said, oh, I just got my Reiki 3 certification, or I teach Reiki. I'm a Reiki master and I teach Reiki. That's what I do for work. And I am really cautious to say this because I don't have the exact data, but I'm gonna round. I would say 50% of the people who have a co-joined owl and UFO experience are Reiki healers. And if they're not doing Reiki healing, they're doing some other form of healing. 50%, half.
Yeah, I knew it would be a large percentage, if not even more than that, because of all the people I speak to, there seems to be a trend which is if you are psychically inclined, you're more likely to obviously see a UFO or have an experience of some variety, be it ghost or otherwise. And the people that aren't that way inclined, and I would put myself in amongst that, I haven't seen anything, and that just seems to be a trend. Whether it's the UFO experience gives the psychic ability or the other way around, who knows? But it is an interesting thread. Yeah,
it's fascinating. It's fascinating. And they're having these hearings in Washington or wherever they're having. I guess it was in Arizona. It's all over the buzz in the UFO community. Boy, nobody said anything about did you gain magical healing abilities from your direct experience they're talking about government documents and agencies within the government, and it's boring as can be. But so the magic to me is in this more elusive aspect. So this gets back to this. So shamanism is a loose word, right? Everyone has a different what that might be. But I would argue that, wow, being a Reiki healer is, I would call, let's say, shaman light. You're all right up close to
yeah, that makes sense.
One woman came to me and she said, I had this UFO experience. I saw this UFO, and then I had this powerful owl thing. And then she kind of went through things. And I thought to myself, this is the stuff that shamans talk about. And I said, what are you doing? She said, oh, well, I don't do it much. And I'm what do you like? Well, I'm doing this sort of therapy work. And well, what's your therapy work? And I'm like, I'm doing hypnotherapy regressions to retrieve past life memories for healing purposes. I'm like, well, that sounds like something a shaman would do, take someone to their subconscious and tap into past lives, whether that's literally what's happening or whether there's some other healing. Undoubtedly, there's healing that's taking place. This is what I'm finding. It's been fascinating.
It is fascinating. And that case you just spoke about where the owl comes over and touches the woman's head, what is that? Just a case of, yes, that's the right thinking, give up your kidney?
It's what I often say, the owl is, your key. So I taking a step back, if the owl is connected to highly charged human experiences, owl isn't doing anything. The owl is just there as a marker, as a point, right? The owl is just a bird in the forest. And so on my keyboard right in front of me here, I have the exclamation point, right? So all I have to do is push that button, and there's a sentence and there's a symbol at the end of the sentence that gives it more impact. It gives it more meaning. Any reader would read that sentence. They get to the end, they say, ooh, this sentence has more impact, more meaning. It's louder. It's more important than the other sentences in the paragraph. That's, to me, the owl. The key on my keyboard is not magical. It's just a key on the keyboard. But it can symbolize something of more urgency and more power. And I would say the same of the owl.
Pure emphasis, emphasizing a point. That is highly interesting, isn't it? I've not thought of it that way. I like that.
I know, but people say, is the owl magical? Which in many traditions it is, sure.
It's immediately reminding me of the crop circle phenomenon, where I've heard recently that the crop circle phenomenon is meant to be like a marker, whether it's in time or a location, whatever it is. It's reminding me of that for some reason. Whether they're linked, who knows? But
I did a whole chapter on crop circles and owls in my first book. Yeah.
Oh, interesting. What did you find there? Was that what I said?
It's not as close. I wanted more, but wow, I found some wonderful stories.
Excellent. Okay. Hopefully we can go through some of them. Let me turn to the screen memory phenomenon.
Sure.
Can you explain the ins and outs of what it is, and then we'll go on from there?
Sure. With it, so there is a lore. So there's a series of books that got published mostly in the 80s and 90s. They're still coming out, where a series of researchers used hypnosis and published these books. So everyone has this impression of the UFO abductee lying on a couch being hypnotized and telling a story of being taken on a ship. I have talked to. So here, so the screen memory issue is here's the story that I get. 1 out of 3 stories plays out like this. I was driving home at night, and it was dark, and I turned a corner, and there was an owl on the road. And the owl flew off. Here, I'll tell you a specific story. Do you know who Dolores Cannon is?
I've heard the name, but I just can't remember.
Dolores Cannon died in 2015. She was this sweet, glowing, kind of radiant grandmother of a character. And she did hypnotherapy as a clinician for years. She was helping people lose weight. She was helping people reduce stress and things like that, stop smoking. So, and then as she was doing this work, people would start, under hypnosis, they would start talking about UFO stuff. And she was like, and this is I've talked to a lot of hypnotherapists. This is well understood that people will start talking about UFO stuff or past life stuff, but this was mostly UFO stuff. So she was at a meeting with her group of the people she worked with at the clinic, and she said, I have to decide whether I'm going to take this UFO stuff seriously. It's emerging in my work. I don't know what to do with it. I'm going to have to decide what to do. So she drives home that night. She's in her truck. She's in Arkansas, the rural road in the forest. She turns the corner, and there's an owl standing in the road. It's 4 foot tall. She pulls the car right up to it, and the owl looks over the hood and looks right at her. She pulls her truck right up to the owl, and the owl looks at her over the hood. Now, I'll tell you what. You take the smallest car in the world, you take the biggest owl in the world, that owl will not be able to look over the hood of a car. She drives home. The owl does it multiple times. Flies down the road, stands there. She pulls right up to the owl, flies down the road, stands there. Now, she talked to her son, and he's like, Mom, there's no owls that are 4 feet tall. She's like, well, what happened then? So she's since passed. This was in her book, this dialogue here, which is totally typical. This is the kind of thing I found. The question I ask everyone, what was going on leading up to the event? What happened after? There's no UFO in this story, except she's doing UFO research. So it's tied into that. What was leading up to it was she had to decide, is she going to go down the road? Is she going to look into this mysterious, elusive UFO mystery? She most assuredly did look into that mystery. She had a profound effect on the overall research community. She's written like 10 big fat books that are wild. And I'll say this, her books are like, it's like reading mythology in a lot of ways. I can't speak for the validity of her stories, but whoa, they're like, she aimed high as far as the stuff she was coming up with.
Cool.
So we have, that's this, the implication is, here's another, so here someone is called to, they wake up in the middle of the night, they walk onto their porch, they're called to go out on their porch, and there's an owl, 4 foot tall owl standing in their yard. And I talked to the guy, and I'm like, well, was this a dream? And I was like, I don't think it was a dream. Like, I could feel the pebbles under my feet. I could feel the cold cement on the porch under my bare feet. Nope, I don't think this was a dream. So under hypnosis, and I've read the transcripts and I've talked to hypnotherapists, the hypnotherapist will say, well, describe this owl. And the person under hypnosis will say, well, it's skinny, and it's got a bald head and these big black eyes, and it's wearing a tight-fitting little spacesuit, and I don't think that's an owl. So the implication is that the UFO occupant, in most cases, would be the gray alien with the bald head and the big black eyes, would be projecting some sort of psychic impression into the mind of the observer, whether it's done through technology or through psychic means. I can't answer that, but the consistency of these stories is remarkable. Here's another story. So, woman is, she's adult now. At the time she was 19 years old, and she was working at a summer camp in the Northwest. And she was out in the backcountry, and she was teaching girls. So it was all girls, and they had 2 campsites. One was in one point, and one was the other point, and then just where the flat ground was. And there was a trail that connected the 2 campsites. So she was at one campsite, and she was walking to the other campsite. So she could hear the girls playing and hear their voices behind her. Mm-hmm. She's on the trail, and she turns the corner, and there's a gray alien standing in the bright sunshine next to the path. Little thing, 4 foot tall, big bald head. She said it was like looking at a white football helmet, like reflecting the sun. It was chalky and weird and terrifying. And she was just like, ugh. Now she had already had UFO experiences in her life, and she recognized that it was somehow involved in her life. She had only ever had experiences at night. She had never had any kind of experience during the day. Full daylight, clear as day, gray alien standing right next to the path. And she looks at it and it looks at her, and she, like, this thing she gets the impression like this thing is like, oops, busted. Like, you caught me. Like, you're not supposed to see me. And she said she heard in her what is nearly 100%. I would say so close to 100% that is that any kind of communication between the UFO witness or the UFO abductee or whatever term you want to use, the experiencer, and the beings themselves is telepathic. Nobody moves their mouth. It's all direct mind-to-mind transfer. That's 100% consistent. She looks at this thing, it looks at her, she hears this reverberating kind of like, oh shit moment where she hears this voice go, owl, 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 and then whoosh, it turns into an owl right in front of her eyes. And this owl turns around and walks into the woods.
That is a freaky one, isn't it?
That was an A+ story.
Proper freaky one.
Wow, that one's an A+ story. Yeah. So I have a similar story of so it's not just, so that would be the so within the UFO research community, the term screen memory is well understood to mean that that something is in place of the gray alien. Now, it's not just owls. So at the top of the list, even Stephen, is owls and deer. So deer get reported and owls get reported. So people say, you know, I had this weird experience. I was driving down the road and there was this deer standing in the road and looked me right in the eyes. And so so here's one quick story. Woman who's had UFO contact experiences, bright flash, nighttime, outside. She opens the door, stands on her porch, like, where did that bright flash come from? She's looking around, and then right next to the porch are 3 gray aliens right next to the porch. She like was looking out at the yard, and then she looks sideways, and they're right next to her, and they do the same. They kind of go, and then they morph into 3 deer, and these deer walk backwards around the corner. It's such an eerie, like.
Yeah, I've never seen a deer walk backwards like that.
I know. So I've never. Yeah. So she saw them turn into morph into. I've talked to people who've seen. So the deer and owl are at the top of the list, overwhelmingly. But below that are things like raccoons and squirrels and cats and Jesus shows up a lot. And clowns are very commonly reported. Firemen, people will be driving down the road and they'll be like, what seems like an accident, and there's firemen there, and there's bright lights and stuff like that. And then
it's interesting with those ones, isn't it? I mean, the owl and deer and the alien phenomenon lends itself to the UFO experience, but the fireman one I always link up with like angels or those sort of things. Yeah. And clown, they're archetypes in a way. Clown is certainly an archetype. Jesus is powerfully an archetype. Owl and deer are part of the mythos. So Diana and Athena both had. Athena had a companion owl, and Diana had. They're sisters in Greek mythology. I think it's owl. So so Diana had a deer, and Athena had an owl as her companion. So it's right there embedded into our mythology. Yeah, it is embedded. I've got a question on that later, actually. I was going to ask you, back to the Dolores Cannon case. So this big owl looks over her bonnet and she goes back and says, I saw this owl. It doesn't exist. Mermaids, where does that lead? Just to her changing her path, or did she have experiences?
I can't answer whether she had experiences, though it feels she's passed on. Her 2 daughters work in the UFO community. They publish her books. They have a conference annually, so they're very much involved. I cannot answer whether she had direct experience. Here's an odd story. This woman who had a powerful UFO and owl experience contacts me. Her name is Katie Walker. This is in 2015. She says, you should have Dolores Cannon on your. I was doing a podcast at the time, and you should interview Dolores Cannon. And I was like, I was at my desk when the mail came in, right? And I watched it come in. I watched it go ping, and then it went chunk, 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 chunk. It just listed the same email came in 15 times. I just watched it go tink, 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 tink,
right.
Tink, 15 times.
And what was that? Sorry.
And that was the email where Katie Walker, who had a UFO and owl experience, had said
Suggested.
Dolores Cannon. She says you should read this book. She puts the book in that has the story of Dolores Cannon. She's written like 12 books. It's the one where she has the story. It's called The Custodians, where she has the story of the owl in the road, and she died. I think it was right 2015, and so that has never happened to me before. So this highly charged, odd event is in connection with Dolores Cannon and this woman suggesting that it be I should talk to her. That was the day she died.
Oh, crikey.
That was the day she died, and it went ba-boom, ba-boom, ba-boom 15 times.
Yeah. These are weird things.
It's dream language, yeah.
It's odd. Life is odd. It really is. One of my questions was going to be, how do you think the screen memories is achieved? Now, I think you partially explained that, which is you think it could be a projection into the mind, or it could be just they press a button and a cloaking field appears or something. But yeah. My question that got prompted by the deer little story you gave, which is, why do you think they backed away? Because if they were coming and they could, you hear in the UFO lore that they can suppress memories or wipe it back. Why do you think they backed away in that instance? Do you think it was just surprise on their behalf?
It might have been surprise on their behalf. It might have been, why did the gray alien run away from the side of the path? Yeah. If it had the magical powers of this to just take over the consciousness of the individual, they could have done. So yeah, I do not have an answer for that. So, but I can speculate what it might be. That doesn't mean I know it. So
sure, and I like the fact you've just said that, by the way, because that just lends credence to your character anyway, doesn't it? I don't believe
some people don't
do
that. Yeah,
no, I know.
When someone tells you the answer, when someone tells you the answer, that's like, I've gotten used to it. You go to UFO conferences and you start a conversation, and someone will say, "Oh, these are my space brothers from the Pleiades." Now they very well might be, but wow, that's a it
is a bold statement, and I don't know what it says about either character of myself or them, or the experiences. I mean, these things could 100% be happening to these people that say stuff like that, or it could be me not believing. I don't know. It's weird.
Well, the way I say it is like, oh, there's a guy in the shopping mall. Every December, he shows up in the shopping mall. He's got a big white beard and wears a white suit. He says he's from the North Pole. So if you were in like elementary school, if you were like an 8-year-old kid, you could have a symposium and collect a lot of data and say, okay, I found this in print. Santa Claus lives in the North Pole. It's right here in a book. Like here, I'm going to ask my parents, where does Santa Claus live? And say, oh, the North Pole. It's true. Right. So there's lots of, you're being fed evidence. The child's not doing anything wrong by believing that evidence. As an adult, I try to be discerning. At the same time, I don't want to step on anyone else's experiences. Here's what often happens. Someone says like, wow, flying saucer landed in my backyard. It was close enough to touch the glass of my back door. The edge of the flying saucer was in my backyard. I've heard stories like that. And then, so they'll tell me those kind of stories. I hear those with consistency, and then they'll add something to it. Like, oh, and that was and then they told me I was chosen to play this important role. Well, that's a difference between they told me I was chosen to play an important role, where that's very quickly can turn to I was chosen to play an important role. That's entirely different things.
Definitely. Yeah. And I think, obviously we have to go into these things with an open mind, isn't it? But I just wonder, where is the line? Sometimes I know that's a side thing we went on there, but
no, that's everyone. That's in the lore. That's called the crazy line, and everyone knows that there's a crazy line. Oh yeah, like I'll walk right up to the crazy line. I'm not walking over that because the stuff over there is crazy. What happens is the longer you're in the thing, that crazy line moves and moves and moves. And
I was going to say,
you hear this story 300 times, and it's not so crazy anymore. Yeah.
See, when you mentioned the Congress hearings recently with David Grush, now obviously they can only push it so far, and so they're literally talking about nuts and bolts crafts, no further. They've not gone in too much into the pilots or bodies, and then they haven't even then touched on all the potentials, like the psychic abilities post that, and all that stuff, is it? So I think you have to push that line a little by little. So maybe these are outliers, and they are 100% telling the truth, but we're not there yet. We're part of the line. Maybe
The
it's that.
culture's not there yet.
Yeah.
Yeah. So the culture's not there yet. But as an individual, as me and researcher that I respect and stuff like that, they're way past that crazy line. They're like, or what the crazy line that would be set down by the public. I have a
Yeah.
totally different crazy line because I'm just hearing these same stories with such a consistency and have had my own direct experiences in ways that confirm that there's a I use the term the myth makers. That's a term I'm very comfortable with. So instead of saying the aliens, like when I'm in like a more thoughtful pose, I'll say it's the myth makers because I'm convinced that not so much the UFO thing, but more like the story of the fellow who was going to pray at the field and then his car was stopped by what seems like not a real owl. It seems like a magical little event, right? Boom, boom. Felt it go into the tires. Nothing there. So a magical event took place, kept him on his path. The symbol of the owl was present in that story. I am convinced that people would step out of their cave, eons ago and have mythic owl experiences. And these are this is part of the human experience, that these owl things, especially the stories of death, those are very, very consistent that I found in my research.
I think I alluded to this earlier, but I'm to reiterate it again, or ask the question again. Why owls as a screen memory? Now, obviously, you've brought up deer, which I hadn't necessarily remembered or heard before. What is it about an owl, do you think, that the aliens use as a screen memory? Is it just because they're big and they got the big black eyes?
That you could go down that avenue. That's a very fruitful avenue of speculation. Yeah. So I've talked to them. I've talked to the UFO investigators, they hypnotherapists. I'm like, you ask them, hey, you got any owl stories? They roll their eyes. I'm like, I get owls all the time in this research. They show up all the time. And it's like, it's a screen memory. It's just a screen memory. And I had a researcher tell me sort of forcefully, like the story with Kristen at the beginning, those 3 owls, those weren't owls. That was a screen memory. I'm like, I saw them. They were like 11 inches tall. They were flying around. Like they were owls. And so that's like, how to say this. I've learned I know what not to do when I talk to someone. I know I don't want to tell them what their experience is. That's not my job. He told me what my experience was. And I'm like, I don't buy it. So, your question was, why owls show up in the screen memories? Yes. So the researcher will say, well, the owl sort of looks like the gray alien, right? They got the big black eyes and sort of spooky at night, and you can kind of follow that logic. Yeah. But from my research, and this is me talking. Sure. This is I would say that the owl is an archetype. Now, archetype is one of those words that like philosophy students can stay up late in the dorm room and debate all night long and not come up with a cohesive answer. But the implication is that there are elements within our collective knowing, like the owl, let's say. So you go to the movie theater and you see Star Wars and Luke Skywalker's fighting with his lightsaber and it's a big adventure story and you're swept away in the story. You are watching a movie with the dynamism of Hollywood and a story and an adventure. You are seeing the story of the hero's journey.
That's right.
Right. So the hero is an archetype. You don't need to know that when you're watching the movie, but you're tapped into that in an unconscious way. I would argue that the owl comes, let's say, preloaded with a mythos that other animals don't have, that we recognize. Everyone says it. Everyone says like, oh, wow, I saw an owl on the fence on my backyard. Wow, it was magnificent. It had a majesty to it. Ooh, it was eerie. It looked at me in the eyes. Oh, it was like, I feel honored. Wow, this is the stuff I hear over and over again. It's just a bird, right? That's what people say. So the owl is within our collective memory banks, baked into our DNA is a collective knowledge of a deeper meaning to the owl. What that deeper meaning might be, I can speculate and riff on, and someone else could speculate and riff. We might come up with 2 different things that overlap a little bit, but I would say that the owl, this is my answer, which I can't back up without, it's just speculation on my part. The owl is an archetype, as is a deer, as is a clown, as is Jesus, as is a dead relative. These are the things that people report as screen memories. I would argue that these are archetypes. The archetype of the owl. Now, I'm really going out on a limb here.
Sure, go for it.
The owl. So this is what I'm saying is, in my research, every once in a while I come up with an idea, or an idea falls into place, and the puzzle pieces that I can't get the puzzle to make sense. Every once in a while, a bunch of puzzle pieces will just go click, 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 click. So if I view the mystery of the owl as an archetype showing up as a screen memory, the things click into place nicely. Earlier I said owls show up around the time of shamanic initiation, right? So I says, like, every night I would wake up and there'd be a 4-foot tall owl like staring at my window. I was living in Hawaii, and this thing stare in my window, and there's like, I know there's no owls out there, right? I mean, there's no 4-foot tall owls. There's like, every night I would wake up, I would lie in bed, I would sit up, there's a 4-foot tall owl behind the big glass window. And was he being initiated? This is a way to frame it. I'm not saying it's how it. Dr. John Mack, who died in 2004, wrote a book called Passport to the Cosmos. He was doing UFO experiencer research, and he speculated in that book, it's a beautiful book, that he compared and contrasted the shamanic rites of initiation in cultures all over the world to the UFO contact experience. Really powerful book. So I didn't invent this connection, but I feel like it's a very fruitful avenue of speculation. So the UFO researcher would say, yeah, the owl just looks like a gray alien. I cautiously say the owl is an archetype, and the UFO occupants are choosing that archetype on purpose so that it is associated with the contact experience.
Interesting. Do you know to what end?
Well, the implication would be that the UFO occupants would then become shamans. Now, shaman, as I said earlier, is a loosey-goosey term that, like, you ask 10 people what it means, you get 10 different answers. I would say that I'm the healing thing that I talked about earlier. So I speculated with, there's a researcher named Joe Lewells, and he's very open about this, like this connection in the way he discusses it. So we talked, and I recorded the conversation, and I used big chunks of that conversation in my first book. It feels like, now this is kind of cartoon logic, right? This is like a Gary Larson cartoon in a way, but it feels like the UFO occupants are flying above Earth in their flying saucer. I don't think it works like this, but the UFO occupants are flying above Earth in their flying saucer, looking down at the humanity, going like, yikes, they're in trouble. Like, what do they need? They don't need a new bomb. They don't need a new form of energy. They don't need these people who their minds work differently than ours. They are not us. They are something beyond us. The myth makers, let's say, are looking down at us, and they say, you know what they need? They need more shamans. Let's seed the population with shamans. And then, so that's what's happening. People with a UFO contact experience, not just that, people who have near-death experience come back and do play a shamanic role in society. And so I'm not saying that's true. I'm saying, for me, the puzzle pieces click together nicely when I go down this avenue of speculation.
I like that phrase you said then, where they're seeding.
Mm-hmm.
We've heard the scenarios that humanity itself has been seeded to the earth, and now we're seeding ideas or paths to make humanity almost go the right way, or at least give them a choice to go the right way. It's an interesting phenomenon when you link it all together, like you said, with the mesh thing. With screen memories, I think I asked this earlier, but again, please forgive me, because my memory is not literally as it should be. No pun intended. Why screen memories, do you think, as opposed to making people just forget and then not bothering with the screen memories? Because in that story specifically, when that owl, oh Christ, I'm meant to be an owl, and then buggered off being an owl. Why that? If they could just go, or whatever they do, and make people forget.
So the implication is that when you sit at the bar with a UFO researcher at a conference, You get a couple glasses of wine in them and like, what's really going on? And then they'll often say things like, oh my God, I think this is much, much more widespread than anyone dares think. So the implication is that people are having these experiences, lots of them. This is not me talking. This is just me sort of boiling down conversations I've had.
Sure.
Lots of people are having these experiences. They're totally unremembered. So there might be lots of people out there who have had the complete mind wipe. They don't remember their contact experiences. And the other aspect is they are doing it on purpose for some reason. They're trying to shake up the witness by giving them an absurd story, a dream logic story, a story of dream logic. The deer walk backwards, and the owl, the alien turns into an owl and runs into the forest. So the deer, the owl that ran into the forest, she said it like ran in a strange way, like it was on a hovercraft. She went back and traced the route through the tall grass that this owl alien ran into the forest. She traced the route, and she said the ground went down into kind of culvert ditch kind of thing, and then went back up, and then went into the forest. But that's not what she saw. She saw the owl move like a hovercraft. What's going on?
That's quite common, isn't it? I heard that before, where they said that an alien being seen to have levitated across.
They'll levitate, and often what happens is the aliens will tell the people, like the person will like be escorted out of their car. There's a landed flying saucer. The person will be escorted out of the car, and they'll levitate a few inches off the ground. They're not walking. They're like on a weird invisible hovercraft. Yeah. So
strangeness abound.
I know it's rough. It's it's tough. Yeah.
It's hard to get your mind around it. It's almost too. I said this to somebody last week. It's almost too much. How can we make sense of it? We almost can't.
I'm not looking at the big totality. The whole thing is too much. You take any aspect of it. I'm sure you talk to the material scientist that's like got the little fleck of of the Roswell craft under an electron microscope. I'm sure they're like, oh my God, it's too much. Like it's just like the whatever you call it, the isotopic ratios don't match, the bonding of three elements don't match. Like it's nothing we can do on Earth. I'm sure they're like, it's too much. I'm pulling the tiniest little thread of owls and UFOs, and it's like, yeah, I spend half my day. It's too much.
An interesting thing that just come to mind. We touched on seeding earlier, and your book is called Messengers, and then with the other subtitle part. Do you think the messenger is actually you and isn't the owls?
Oh, wow. So, well, I'll back up a little bit. So owls in mythology, right? So the mythos of the owl, right? So the owl flies at night, can fly into the forest, flies in what we would call complete darkness, starless night. The owl can fly absolutely comfortably through the forest in complete darkness. Now, presently, we know that the owls have highly developed eyes, they have highly developed hearing, they have they're very skilled in flight, and they can see in very low light conditions, what we would essentially call zero light. The owls have plenty of light to see to fly in the forest at night. Ancient man would have watched this happen. It would have seemed magical. Ancient man understood the owl flew at night. Ancient man was in a magical day-to-day. They imbued their own life. I'm boiling this down in a way that so ancient man would be able to say like the owl was magic. The owl flies into the darkness. That is a metaphor for flying to the land of the dead, flying to the land of the gods, for flying to the land of our ancestors, flying to that other realm. Yeah. Consequently, the mythos is the owl would then come back with a message. Now, during the day, the raven plays that role, the eagle plays that role. It flies into the land of the gods and comes back with a message. At night, it's the owl that comes back with a message. In the day, it might be a concrete daylight thing. Here's some pragmatic thing. You need to plant your crops on this day, and that's the message. The raven gives the village member. But the owl flying at night gives a spiritual thing, gives a deeper thing, talks to the shadow realm. So that's the mythos. Now, in the history of publication, Harry Potter is the most popular series of books ever. Right? This is right now, present day.
Sure.
Harry Potter has an owl that delivers the mail. It's perfect. The messenger. It's perfect. It's like right now here, our present day mythology in the form of our pop culture, a story that we all share. has an owl that delivers the mail. Perfect. This ancient mythology playing itself out present day. So your question was, why is the...
No, I said, do you think the messenger isn't owls in this scenario? The messenger is you.
Okay, so I have been through like there's a in 2018 I went through a hypnosis session.
Cool.
It was really rough. Like, wow, did like stuff come up? I can talk about it if you want.
Yeah.
So I'll just say this. I'll front load this whole thing. I don't believe it. Like the story that emerged, I don't believe it truly happened. But wow, is it a story, right? So you have a dream. Like, wow, can you have a powerful dream? And then in the morning you say, well, it's a dream. Like you have a, it's funny when I talk about the hypnosis session, I'll often just start to say, well, in the dream, and then this hypnosis session, there's one event that took place in March 10th, 2013, which I kind of call my confirmation event, where I was sleeping outside under the stars in southern Utah, and there was no fear associated with this event. I can tell the whole story if you want.
Yeah, go for it. No, I'm okay.
Okay. So March 10th, 2013, 10 years ago, it's 2023 now,
Yep.
10 years ago. So I would have been 50 at the time. And I was coming back from a UFO conference, and I just pulled off to the side of the road, and I slept on the side of the road, and this is kind of common in the desert in the West, big open spaces, and anyone driving late at night, just pull off and nobody cares. And it's called cowboy camping. You just lay your sleeping bag down under the stars. And I was driving, I had a big winter sleeping bag and a big thick pad and a pillow. And it's March, so it's cold. It's like wintertime feeling. Magical, perfect night out, trillions and trillions of stars. And I woke up in the middle of the night. I looked up at a hilltop nearby, and there was a thing on top of this hilltop, and I said to myself, that looks just like a flying saucer. That's a landed flying saucer. It's right there on the hilltop. There's a landed flying saucer right there. And I thought to myself, like I've been immersed in the research for a few years, and I was talking to a lot of people, and I was like, if this was a flying saucer, I'd know. Like I'd feel some sort of psychic vibe. And I just kind of waited for this. And I looked at this thing, like nothing. I got nothing. And I was like, somebody's got a roundhouse. Someone built a roundhouse up on that hill, and I didn't see it when I pulled in. I rolled over and went to sleep. I woke up a little while later, and there was a coyote howling. It was so close. Like it was howling. It was so close. It was so loud. Like I worked in the outdoors. I did a lot of outdoor work. I've slept outside a lot. I've heard a lot of coyotes. Coyotes are little. They're like not much bigger than a fox. And they, oh my word, it was so loud. I don't understand why I couldn't see it. I was in the sagebrush. I was looking around. It was really a magical thing. So I'm looking at the craft or whatever it is. I call it a round structure on a hill. And then I go, well, and I fall back asleep with this coyote howling. Woke up a third time, and there was a light behind the bush. It was a great big juniper bush, big, dense, thick juniper bush right at my feet where I was lying. And I sat up, and I was like, what is behind that bush? There's a light. Could have been just another car that came in and parked right where I was. But it seemed odd. It was a strange light. Now, I just looked up at the hill. There was the round structure was there. I went back to sleep. I woke up the next morning. It was it was the daylight savings time changes. I don't know if you do that in England.
Yeah, we do. Yeah.
So like the clock didn't match up, and I was kind of like woke up that morning. Something happened last night, and all of a sudden my watch was like, wait a minute, how come my clock on my car doesn't match my flip phone? And like, what is going on? And it took me a while to figure out like, oh, it's the daylight savings time. But I was like freaked out, and so I get home and I'm like, I got to figure out what was on that hill. It's interesting, that morning when I left, I don't remember looking up at the hill. I might have, but I just simply don't remember. I got on Google Maps. I looked up the spot. I'm very skilled with maps from all the outdoor work, and there was nothing on that hill, just an empty meadow. I was like, okay, maybe the thing was just built, and so I've gone back, nothing on that hill. But that was it was a long way from my house, but it's like 10-hour drive. So I've been there more than once since then, many times. Nothing on that hill, and I drew a picture of it. I put it on my blog. I made some notes. Here's this weird night. And then after I did all that, I had this weird thing where I had this whoosh, whoosh, psychic image of a map with 3 points. Now, each of these 3 points, the one that I knew exactly, the one from the night before, was at this point on the what would be the westernmost dot on the map. It was a straight yellow line with 3 push pins. And this was a psychic flash. This is like only I saw it. I created a map, and so what happened was 3 separate events, all of them that kind of murkily, that's not a word. These murky events that sure seem to imply some sort of UFO contact event took place, all lined up. And I got right. I found each one on the map and I zoomed right in. I spent the afternoon like kind of going crazy, like, oh my God, 1, 2, 3 points all line up. Nobody, like the secret government didn't like hypnotize me and make this happen or something like that, which is what some people in the UFO community would, that's an avenue of thought that they would go down. What it did was in that moment, March 13th, 2010, all my doubts gone. It was actually the day after, because that was, March 10th, 2013. When I looked at that line in the map, all my doubts were gone. Like, this is real. This is real. and then now let's go to the event that would have been 2013. 5 years later, I have a hypnosis session with a woman, Yvonne Smith, in California. And I said, let's just talk about this one night, because there's no fear associated with that night. It was kind of a beautiful night. A coyote. Now, coyote is also a very symbolic, mythic animal, especially in that part of the country, the native lore. The coyote holds the myth as the trickster, and also the light behind a bush, a burning bush, holds all kinds of mythos too. Yeah. So, in the roundhouse, this is funny. So the roundhouse is a term that Native Americans use for the tribal
shaman rituals,
holding place. Yeah, the shamanic ritual place takes place in the roundhouse, or the kiva. And so she says, great, we'll talk about that. And I said, hey, when I'm under hypnosis, you ask me what's up with the owls. She says, great, sure, I'll yeah, no problem, great. So we go through this hypnosis, and she takes me back to the night. And she says, well, no, where are you? And I'm like, I'm lying in my sleeping bag and I'm looking up at the stars. It's pretty. My car's parked right there. It's comfortable. It's pretty. It's warm. I'm like, Wichita. And like, it's warm in the sleeping bag. It's cold outside. And then she asks if you're cool. And I'm like, no. And then all of a sudden I go, it's them. It's them. I know it's them. It's them. It's them. And I'm looking at the glow behind the bush. And now this is in my hypnosis is a weird thing. Someone asks you a question, you answer, and then all of a sudden you're answering things like, how did that come out of my mouth? Like you're just saying things. It's like, and then if I'm having visuals, it's other people have said different things, but the visuals for me are just this kind of like click, click. You just get like a little
slideshow sort of thing.
A little slideshow. A single
have you
frame.
got a quick? I'm sorry to interrupt, but have you got an audio recording of it? Did you?
Process? I have. I put it in my third book. I transcribed it. I put it it's on a website. It's on Whitley Strieber's website. You might be able to just click on it and search it out. I cautiously put that recording on like a private website that you'd have to kind of work a little bit to get to. Wow. I'm not putting that on YouTube. Whoa, is it heavy? Like I'm crying and swearing and oh man, I'm like, yeah. So it's pretty, I wouldn't say embarrassing, but it's so emotional. So she takes me back to the spot and all of a sudden I say, I'm looking down at this big round structure. I'm looking down at this thing. I'm floating above this thing. It's a black thing in the nighttime environment, and it's got a ring of lights around the edge of it, and I'm looking straight down at this thing. I'm floating above it. And I think I'm still in the sleeping bag. And Yvonne says, are you out of body? And I have no idea. I'm looking down at this thing. I feel like I'm still in the sleeping bag. And then the next thing I know, I'm like, whoosh, I'm walking in this hallway. And it's this round hallway. It feels like I'm inside of a donut, So basically, the implication is if I'm in a round flying saucer and there's a single hallway that goes around the entire interior, that's what it feels like. I'm walking in this curved hallway. And the very first thing I think to myself is, I'm not tall. I'm not tall. I'm like 6 foot in normal life, but I feel tiny. And I look to my right and I look to my left, and there's gray alien on one side and a gray alien on the other side, and they're my height. And I tell the hypnotherapist, it's weird, they're my height. And she just very calmly says, look down at yourself. What do you see? And I look down and I say, oh, I've got these long, skinny fingers, and I'm wearing a tight-fitting alien outfit, and I'm got this like shiny spacesuit on, and I think I'm a gray alien. She doesn't skip a beat. She doesn't mean anything to her. I even say, this feels really normal. This feels really normal. And like, now afterwards we speculated a little bit and kind of, and I said, you know what it feels like? It feels like there was a rubber suit, like a rubber suit with a gray alien, an empty suit, an empty gray alien rubber suit in my, like if I was out of body, like my soul essence or whatever you want to call it, my just went right in the suit, and I was walking right down the hall. Like it was normal.
I was literally writing that down to ask you that very thing.
Yeah. So she just says, and what happens next, Mike? And then all of a sudden I'm in this conference room. Now this conference room has got like gray or beige carpeting. It's kind of chintzy. It's got bad wallpaper, kind of in fluorescent lights, and there's folding tables in this conference room. And I'm standing there, and there's this folding table in front of me, like a cheap plastic folding table. And there are a series of beings on there. I can't quite see them, but I'll tell you, they're the gray aliens. It was like a row of gray aliens, maybe 8 of them or something. And they're directly in front of me, and I'm standing alone in the room. It feels like there might be the 2 beings behind me. This is odd. You know what? I've told this story to people who do near-death experience work. And then when I say, oh, there's 2 beings behind me, they go, oh, the 2 beings. Like that's well understood in near-death experience. They're like, there's this feeling, you never see them, but there's 2 beings right behind you. So, like in a play, there's what's called a 3-wall set.
Yes.
It was like a cheap 3-wall set. It felt like the production company had no budget and had to make a cheap set of a conference room. And that's where I was at. It felt like that. Like I never saw out the 4th wall.
Behind you.
So, pardon?
Behind you. Is that what you meant?
Well, it would have been more on the side.
Oh, okay.
In a way.
Right.
So like, the folding table would have been on the left side of the room. I was standing on the right side of the room. I was facing the folding table. And so anyway, and then I'm like, why am I here? What am I doing here? What's going on? Why am I here? And they go, you volunteered for this. Like, what does that mean I volunteered for this? Why am I here? What am I doing here? And then they say, now is the time. I don't get this. What do you like? And then I got kind of stuck in this thing where it was like, you volunteered for this. Now is the time. I got really frustrated. And there came this point where I like snapped, and I got so angry. And I just started, this is almost impossible to listen to on the audio. It is like rough. Like I'm so emotional. I'm like screaming and crying and swearing. I'm like, and Yvonne is asking, Mike, what is happening? What is wrong? And I'm like, they never told me it would be this hard living here. They never told me being here would mean being sad, being lonely. They never talked about depression. They never talked about pain. They never told me. And I'm like square. I'm like, it's rough to listen to. And she said, Mike, what is happening? And it's like, the implication was, which I felt very clearly, was that I, in whatever spirit realm or angelic realm between lives, in a previous life, in another reality, I volunteered to come to Earth to play this role. And I came from this magical realm where you're like in bliss in heaven, or we're like in, as some like mystical, energetic light being or whatever it might be. I came here incarnate into this, meat suit, and then play this role. I'm not saying that's true, but I'm saying that's certainly the impression I got while under hypnosis in this dream realm almost. So Yvonne is like, what do they want? And I'm like, they want me to play some role. Like what role? Like, I don't know. They don't understand. They don't get it. It's like some sort of business deal. It's like it's some sort of business deal, and I don't have a choice. I don't have a choice. And it's like, what do they want? And I remember like screaming, they want me to play some role. And then like click, like I'm back at I'm back in the sleeping bag, and there's like a minute of total silence. You can actually hear me being super frustrated. You can actually hear me on the audio go, like I deflate. Like I was like, like veins in my forehead, like as tense and freaked out and emotional as I've ever been in my life. And then from one instant, just as I felt like my breathing stopped, it felt like my heart stopped. I was so calm. And she said, Mike, what happened? Where are you? And I said, I think I'm back in the sleeping bag. And we talked a little bit and tried to make sense of what it may or may not be. And she said, what do they want? And I'm like, I don't know. She said, you can tell me, Mike. You can tell me what they want. I'm like, I don't know. You know what it feels like? It feels like I'm in a spy movie and I'm holding an envelope and I'm not allowed to open the envelope. And then she says, which I had asked her earlier, she says, and Mike, what is your connection to owls? And without skipping a beat, I say, the owls aren't important. Now this is like I've been like living, breathing like owls for almost a decade at this point.
Yeah.
Like owls aren't important. They're the most important thing. I get up every I spent the last 7 years or something like that getting up and owl emails and owl books and so she says. So I answer, the owls aren't important. Now this part I'm just like, give me it's like 5 sentences just emerged out of me. And I said, the owls aren't important. I am an artist and I understand what a symbol means and how people take in symbolic information. The owl is not important. The owl is a symbol on a door. It is the door that is important. The owl is the correct symbol for the door, but the owl is not important. We are on this side of the door in a tight, claustrophobic little hallway. And on the other side of the door is an infinite vastness.
So you are the messenger, essentially, aren't you? The owl is irrelevant. It's just a key to the door, almost.
It's the exclamation point on the keyboard.
Yeah.
So here. Well, let me just one more thing.
So
that was that event. We were looking to the event of March 10th, 2013. It would be perfect if it was the next day. It was actually about 48 hours later. So the day after, I got all wiggy and like the line on the map and the 3 events and did the drawing of the round structure on the hill. The day after, I started writing the book, The Messengers. The day, like within less than 48 hours after that event, I started writing the book, The Messengers. And then let me also say this. I just want to reiterate this. I don't think it happened in that way. Whatever happened, I feel like I was seeing something symbolic. There is no ugly conference room on a flying saucer with bad beige carpeting and cheap plastic folding tables. Like I was presented with, it feels like I was presented with dream logic that had a symbolic story. I would argue that the story is important. It's got a lot of power to it. I don't know if it really happened. So I'm not going to say it did.
It's like a film that's been remade loads of times. They look different, but the message is the same. That sort of thing.
Yeah.
Who are the they in your story there?
Well, the implication would be they would be the gray aliens with the big black eyes and the bald heads.
Would they be, though?
Pardon?
Would they be, though? Is it not a step beyond that the they are the spiritual part that then gets downloaded into an alien grey, just like you were downloaded into an alien grey?
The implication is that I was somewhere in a previous existence in the story realm where there was no pain, there was no suffering, there was no density, like the heaviness of reality. So, what is that? Is that I'm in a like off the cuff kind of pop culture thing? That's heaven, the spiritual realm, clouds and lightness and wonderfulness and no pain. And so I guess if you go back far enough in any kind of thing, like eventually you're going to get to that kind of angelic realm, that energetic realm. So they in the conference room were gray aliens. The beings walking down the hall were the gray aliens. That taking it back one or two steps puts it into the realm of the magical, the mystical, in this heaven realm.
It opens up some more questions.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's an interesting story, but I seem to take it slightly different. And I'm going to mention a couple of phrases. Soul contract being one of them, which we no doubt you will have heard across your podcast series and research. And also, is the earth a prison? That sort of thing. That's what it's throwing open to me here. Like you're almost a prisoner saying, "Oh, you've got no choice. You are going there to learn a lesson or whatever." That's how it comes across. So let's expand on that thought and theorize into it. Soul contracts. Is it then linked to this? If we could say Earth is a prison planet and we are prisoners coming here to learn our lesson. Do you think that's true, or am I just making crap up?
Oh no. I think that is it true? I can't answer. Is it a like I can wrap my mind around that really easily. Yeah. And I can sort of proceed forward with that in my mind. Soul contract, the implication is I signed a soul contract. You agreed to this. You volunteered for this. Yeah. I signed a soul contract to come here and play a role. The role certainly seemed to be, I started writing a book about owls and UFOs 48 hours after that weird event in the sand in southern Utah. So, yeah. So am I a puppet on a string? Did I do their bidding by writing the book, The Messengers?
Yeah.
The book had already been out a bunch of years. The book had been out 3 years before I had that experience. So I kind of look back, I had never noticed that, I wrote this book 48 hours after lying in the sand and having this powerful experience. So I don't want to be like the puppet on the string. I want to have a little bit of my own force. At the same time, I will say this has been a really interesting new chapter of my life.
I was going to say,
yeah, really. Wow. I've met some wonderful people with powerful experiences. And I've collected stories that have that mythopoetic power that I love. I'm collecting exactly the stories that I have always loved in my life. Those kind of mythic, magical parables.
If we extrapolate a bit further out from this, right, which is if we go down this whole soul contract, prison planet, it doesn't have to be that, by the way, but I'm just thinking it out. What is it about the plan that took you 50 years or 44 years or whatever you said to the point where you moved path? Why that late in life rather than say when you were 22? Do you know what I mean? Why?
I know exactly. Yeah, I've thought about this too. So like that. I mean, so one answer is they're smarter than I am. They have their reasons. I can't know their reasons. That would be I'm speculating. That's one way to look at it. Another way to look at it is I needed to have a full, rich experience of lifetime experiences. And I was doing incredible. I lived in New York City as a yuppie in the 80s. I spent 25 years living in a little cabin in the most beautiful part of North America, being outdoors and skiing and climbing and traveling to Alaska. Wow, did I have a rich life for those chapters. I have an even more rich life now where I'm simply talking to people on the phone and interacting with people with these powerful stories. So here, I'll tell you one owl story.
Yeah, sure.
A woman contacts me. I got to be careful. I'm not going to give any names away. She is living in a rural area. She's got a metal roof. She wakes up in the middle of the night and she says, click, 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 right above her bed on the metal roof. She says, those are owls. And I kind of asked, how do you know they were owls? And she said, well, I just knew. That was the impression I got, they were owls. I'm like, okay. So she hears a click, click, click on the roof. She says owls in her mind. Right? There's owls on the roof. And the next thing she knows, poof, there's this angelic, glowing, shining woman, a beautiful woman appears in her bedroom. She's hovering above the floor. She's got a white gown on. It's like angelic blonde woman with the most beautiful thing she's ever seen, the most radiant, beautiful vision she's ever seen. The woman says, come with me. And whoosh, she's out of the bedroom. She's floating in outer space. She's looking at Earth from outer space. I said, are you on a spaceship on a flying saucer? She said, no, I'm just like kind of in this magical, like, I'm just looking at Earth. I'm in the realm of outer space. And this beautiful, angelic, glowing being with the white gown is right next to me. And she sees the Earth with like energetic realms or energetic energy just swirling around the planet, like a sort of plasma of thin energy, like all around the planet. And the voice says, you're trapped here. We're not letting you out. And then whoosh, she's back in the bed. So there's the prison planet right there. Boom.
Yeah,
Like,
innit?
so I would also say that, so Joseph Campbell said, someone asked Joseph Campbell, who was a mythologist, he's the guy that came up with the hero's journey. I think
That's right, yeah. He was,
Hero
yeah.
of a Thousand Faces. Yeah. So someone said, what's your shortest definition of myth? He said, well, a myth is a story told almost entirely in symbolic terms. So here we have a woman being whisked away into outer space. She looks at the Earth with, like, is it a symbolic treatment that we're in some sort of, we're trapped here, or is it something else? So it's like, where does metaphor end and where does the truth, the literal truth, begin? Like, I'm content in that foggy gray zone. I wasn't for a long time. I'm much more content for it now because I feel like I'm trapped there in some ways. That foggy netherworld between the mythos and the literal. Like, like how do you find a comfortable spot in between those two extremes? So yeah, are we on a prison planet? Boy, I could wrap my mind around that idea too. Like humanity, you're trapped here. Where you got all those nuclear bombs. You're like, you're just a warring culture. You're a bunch of, like, primitive apes that are just like trying to kill each other and have been for the entirety of your existence. We're not letting you in outer space.
Yes.
We might let you to the moon, but
if
you're not getting any
take
farther
it,
than back. Yeah.
yeah, if you take it physically, literally as well, that is what that is, that barrier. Your regression tape, definitely, that's what it suggests to me. Prison. And I know you mentioned spy earlier. That's also very apt, isn't it? Like, that's why you were probably inert for 40, 50 years or whatever, and now you're activated, so to speak. Both
I
ring
feel
true.
I'm the same person, right? Like, I got, like,
Yeah, you are.
like but it, so, yeah, so yeah, it's tough because I'm telling the story. Like, and if I heard someone else tell the story, I'd say, well, that's an interesting story. Like, is that guy crazy? Like, I fully know that I'm all I can do is share the events as best I can. And, and, and hopefully the power of the story feels relevant, and that people don't get locked into is this literally true? Is this metaphorically a story?
I'm going to ask you a personal question now, and it's going to make you question your own story, which is, say you didn't have that experience, right? Your regression experience, and you've done loads of research on all these UFO things, and you might have come across other regression tapes and stuff, like Betty and Barney Hill. That's an example, right? You're more inclined, because you're an open mind, to believe it. And then when you hear loads of those, and you might have heard other tapes, you're going to believe it and believe it and believe it. What makes you think yours isn't true? If you probably, as a logical being, hearing a story over and over and over again, know that those might be. What makes you question yours?
Yeah. So it might be true. Like I can't know that. Like, I know enough about myself to know that I'm just like, I'm going to need serious form of confirmation before I truly know something.
Sure.
And then once again, as I said, like, I may know something but not know the source of it, right? So I know that UFOs and owls are somehow connected. I know that from all the hard work I've done. Wow, what the source is, what the mechanism is, I don't know what the answer to that one is. So so people contact me with their owl stories, and they say things like I haven't told my wife this story. I'm telling you. And they tell me a story. And often it's a story I've heard many times. I am not a clinician. I can't like offer like psychological advice, but I am someone who can say, you are not alone. other people, many other people have shared this story. And then I can also add, I would argue that these stories are universal as part of the human condition or the human experience on Earth and have been since the dawn of man. I said it earlier. Yeah, people stepped out of the cave, had a powerful owl experience. We're still having those powerful owl experiences now. They don't need to be tied to UFOs. They can be tied to all kinds of highly charged human experiences. So I can provide solace. I know that's happening because of how grateful people have been and how clear they've said, you alleviated my stress, my anxiety about that event. So I would very cautiously say, I am not a shaman. I've never been through any, like I'm not a practicing shaman, but I am providing a healing service, not through hands-on Reiki, but through being able to say to people, you are not alone.
Mm-hmm.
This is a story I've heard many times. It's an important story. I can say, like, look for the symbolic meaning. I treat these stories like dreams, like a dream. You could go to a Jungian analyst and lie on the couch and tell them your dream, and the analyst could then say, oh, well, let's symbolically these elements emerge in your dream, and let's see how these play out in your life, and these can provide some sort of better inner workings of your own understanding of yourself. I can offer that to a small degree, and I try to do my best and to be, very mindful of that. So, you asked me earlier, am I the shaman? What role am I playing? Have I been, if I had a UFO and owl experience, and I am saying that is synonymous in some loose way with the UFO and owl experience is synonymous with shamanic initiation.
So knowing all this, do you believe more in your own regression though? Because prior to mentioning your story, you said you didn't really believe it, or you didn't want to believe it. I can't remember your exact phrase.
Well, they're both of it. Here's what I know enough about myself is to know that, wow, that's a tough one to believe.
Yeah, no, that's fine.
And at the same time, I have no problem telling the story. I find it remarkably powerful story. To believe it true, like, first of all, I would have to say, okay, they created a psychic experience where I'm on a fake, whatever, the holodeck. I'm on the holodeck where they created an ugly conference room. I'd have to plug all those little things in, the rubber suit and but this story is rich beyond, like, the coyote was right there howling at my head. I never saw it. Is that an audio screen memory? Right? Was I presented a coyote as an archetypal animal in the Southwest native culture of Southern Utah that means trickster? It means the trickster. Now, the trickster is part of a ceremony. You want the trickster there. That's the court jester. That's like, don't you take yourself too seriously. Like, you're being confronted with something absurd, and I'm here to tell you that it is absurd. That would be the role of the trickster. So, like I'm wrestling with this. There's so many ingredients in the soup that all I can do is proceed forward and tell a couple things, my own stories, as well as the accounts that show up in the that I'm receiving.
Either way, it's fascinating, isn't it?
Yes, either way. So if it's true, if I was literally on board the flying saucer in my spirit realm and in a rubber suit, that's fascinating. Yeah. On the other hand, if I had a mythic parable embedded into my subconscious that emerged on a hypnotherapist's couch that, like, fills in all kinds of missing puzzle pieces, that's also equally fascinating. Yeah.
Yeah, very much so. Very, 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 very much so. Well, I'm going to take a slight side journey now, and we're going to discuss your podcast series, if that's okay. I'm fascinated by it because for me, I started this journey, and normally, I don't know if you know much about me, looked into me, I'm really more of an animator, singer, songwriter, and I do stupid things on the internet, to creations, essentially. That fulfills a creative need in me, yeah? But starting this was to fulfill the intellectual search for answers. That's my reasoning, and I wanted to be deeper and more personal. Is that why you started your podcast, or do you have a different journey?
So I started my initial podcast in 2009, and I was I've said this clearly, between 2006, after the events with Kristen in the mountains, until 2013, the confirmation event on the lying in the sand in southern Utah. 6 to 13, that's 9 years, right? So
Yeah.
that's 9. I spent 95% of my waking hours wondering if I had gone insane in those 9 years. Like that's a little, I mean, it kind of ebbed and flowed and stuff like that, but I'm going to stand by that. The podcast in 2009 was therapy, 100% self-therapy. Like I'm sitting there alone in my little cabin in Idaho going like, I need to talk to someone. I want to talk to this person. I could call them. I could like send them an email. Hey, can I talk to you? They're probably not going to get back to you. You know what I did? I sent an email that says, will you be on my podcast? And they said, sure, I'll be on your podcast. And so I got to talk to Whitley Strieber and Richard Dolan and Brad Steiger, and then a lot of people who were of sort of lesser tier as far as they haven't published their own. Well, some of them had. So there's people like Sesh Cherie and, oh my word, Miriam Delicato and Christopher Knowles. And there's these people that I got to talk with. And it is the first incarnation of my podcast was between 2009 and 2014.
And that was the hidden experience one, is that?
Yeah, hidden experience. And that was 100% self-therapy. You can hear it in me. Oh my God, you can hear him. I'm struggling and I'm asking questions for needy is a kind of a weighted term, but I was needy and I was searching out for these things. When I started writing the first book, the Blue Book, the first owl book, The Messengers, that was also a form of self-therapy. And I say it so plainly. When I worked out so much stuff in that book, at the end of writing that book, I was a much calmer person. I just did a fiction book, just came out 2 months ago. I would say that was a form of self-therapy too. And I feel like I'm a much calmer person after just this recent fiction book came out. So your question was like, what was the reason? Why did you start it? It was like, I did not have a therapist. I could go to a therapist. I actually did. I went to a therapist and said, oh, these things are happening. And I could see the therapist was like, wow, that's really interesting. So I would go and tell the therapist these stories. I got a lot of them. And she was entertained. And I was like, oh, like, I'm not making any progress. I'm paying you. I'm entertaining you. She was great. She was like, these are fascinating. I could tell she like took me seriously, but I wasn't making any progress. I made much more progress as a podcast host, essentially being on the couch and the guest would be the therapist.
Yeah, that makes sense. That's the whole "you are not alone" theme again, isn't it? That's what you were searching for, probably.
Yeah, exactly.
You were searching for different answers to me, but yeah.
You sit alone in a cabin in Idaho with these kind of issues. It's lonely, and I don't know how people did it before the internet. Honestly, I think there are a lot of, like, turn the clock back 30 years. People having these experiences were probably alcoholics, and and all kinds of, like. Not that the internet is a cure, but it did allow me a way to reach out that was significantly easier than it would have been before the internet.
God, yeah.
Around 2009 was right at that point where.
If you think back then as well, they wouldn't have had the openness that we do now either. So it would have been more frowned upon and laughed at then, wouldn't it?
Absolutely.
So you're a winner in that respect.
The story I just told you, wow. That's an unbelievable story. Like, I've gotten no pushback. I mean, people might be talking about being behind my back, but I've gotten no pushback from that story that I just told you about being on board the craft, or whatever that story is, in the conference room in the craft, and the swearing at the tribunal that was like putting me on trial there. So.
Well, I've got zero reason to doubt you. You're a sincere guy, and it seems to back up a lot of other things and stories you hear, doesn't it? Especially from, hence why I came up with Prison Planet and Soul Contracts and stuff. It all plays into the same thing. Doing your podcast, who do you think is your favorite interview you ever had?
Ooh, so I did a series of and then between 2018 and 2021, I guess, right around in there, I did podcast for Whitley Strieber on his site and did probably 60 shows for him.
Yeah.
And so yeah, there's a couple gems in there that just shine. There's a in my first series of podcasts, there's an interview I did with a guy named Sesh Hari. That's his
I don't
pen
know that name.
Yeah, it's his pen name. He's very, very private. And that was probably the most rewarding interview I ever did was with Sesh Hari. Really wonderful interview. He wrote a book called The Handprint of Atlas, and he's had his own contact experiences, and he's very wonderful storyteller. So,
okay. And what did you did that? My next question literally is: which interview surprised you the most, or at very least led you to new info that sidetracked your original thinking? Is he on that basis? Which is why he's probably your best interview.
Well, not so much he surprised me. I was pretty familiar. I had read a couple of his books before I interviewed him, so I knew where he would be coming from. But he was just a really warm-hearted, insightful guy. So which one surprised me the most?
Yeah.
I did an interview with a fellow named Will Boucher on the series I did with Whitley Strieber. Now, Will, so he was, when we said we were going to do the interview, he is the archivist for John Mack's files. John Mack died in 2004, so he spent like a decade going through all the hypnotherapy sessions and transcribing them. They're all transcribed. And he said what emerged was this narrative. Like one person would have would say something in one session, the next session another person would say something else, and then when these were all fed together, it created a richer narrative that was disparate in each individual case, but taken on its totality. It was really a powerful interview. And at the same time, he basically said, I'm not talking about my own experiences when I go on the show. I'm like, okay, no problem, we'll talk about the John Mack stuff. Oh my God, he unloaded. And he's a very well-spoken, thoughtful, calm voice. So that was a great interview. Will Boucher.
I'll look him up, actually. I'm interested in that episode. It's online, isn't it, I assume?
He'd be online. You can just look John Mack Institute. Will Boucher.
Your interview as well.
If you email the John Mack Institute, he's going to reply. So he is the John Mack Institute now that it's been almost 20 years since Dr. Mack died.
But I can listen to your podcast of him.
Yeah,
online.
You can go online and just click on that. Yeah, it should be. And then you'd have to search that out. On my website, it says all podcasts linked, and then you can just scroll down and scroll through it, and that will take you to Whitley Strieber's site. And I'm pretty sure you'll get right on there. And if you can't, just contact me. I'll figure out a way to.
Thank you. It intrigues me that anyone who gives a high recommendation or praise on something surprising, it makes you want to go and search it out, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Besides this one, of course, what do you think the best interview you've ever given is?
So you know what I've done? So I've written these books, and I talked to this marketing woman, and she said, well, do you have your Twitter page? I'm like, no, I don't have a Twitter page. I guess I kind of do, but I don't do anything with it. Oh, do you have a mass email? I'm like, I'm not going to be the guy who sends out a mass email. And she's like going down this checklist. And so she finally like, well, what is your marketing strategy? And I say yes to every single person who asks me to be on their podcast. And she said, okay, fair enough. And so the best interview I gave, there was a couple, I can't remember, they were English. This happened, what happened is I was in this kind of like, I do it a little bit now. I'm much more forthright now, but I still do it a little bit where I'm like, I'm not sure, maybe it kind of happened. I'm aware, like a little tied in knots. I gave an interview with this husband and wife, Rupert and Nicola. I can't remember their it's on my blog. And they host a podcast, OWLS. It's Otherworld something. It's an acronym for owls.
For owls, yeah.
Yeah. So they have an owl as their logo, and they brought me on, and that one was what I felt like was the very first one where I was just like forthright. And they were a husband and wife that were having these experiences. So they had an experience. I hear so many of these stories. It's hard. They were driving home. I think he was driving home, and he saw an owl pass in front of his car, and then he got home, and I'm just picturing this like idyllic English village, and she steps out of the cottage, and he says, I saw an owl. And then they look up in the sky, and it's not a flying saucer in the sense of a craft, but there was some sort of orb thing. And so, like, they told me that story. So I was playing the therapist. I was doing what I do on the, not the therapist. I was playing, I'm going to cautiously say I was playing the shaman, right? So
Yeah.
I'll shaman in quotes. And then I asked the questions I always ask, is what was going on in your life beforehand? And the guy Rupert said the most beautiful thing. He said, we were on the steep uphill curve of a spiritual awakening as a couple. It's like, okay, you saw an owl and UFO. I asked the question, where were you in your life? We were on the steep uphill curve of a spiritual awakening together. And I was at a conference one time and so anyway, I'll get back. I'm sorry, I'm going all over the map here a little bit. So that I would say that with OWLS, I can't remember the acronym, Rupert and Nicola, as husband and wife, that was the one where I just the wishy-washy, a certain level of wishy-washiness ended, and I felt like I was more forthright and
Fair
really
play.
in my element, really sort of wearing like
You're on
comfortable
good
in my element.
form. Yeah.
I was in good form. And it felt like that was, and I have been in that form. I feel like I'm in good form here too. So,
Oh, definitely. And I'll give you one last question before we stop and then record again, if you don't mind, which is, what have you learned about yourself following your conversations as part of your podcast? Obviously, you said you started it for a therapy reason. What have you learned?
okay. So one, these experiences are real. I don't know the source of them. These experiences are real, right? I don't know the source of them. So that has been so calming. Remember I said that confirmation event was seeing the lines in the map?
Yes.
The three dots line up in the map.
Yeah.
To tell that story correctly takes about 40 minutes of all three events and how they line up and where I was at. What I can say happened was, before that, that was the chapter where I said I was worried had gone insane. Stuff was happening that should not happen, mostly in the form of powerful synchronicities, just relentless synchronicities. People around me saw it too. I'm not just, people around me would just like, stuff would happen and they would look at me like, you did that. And it would be just some, whatever it was, like. And so after the confirmation event, it felt like there had been a tape loop in my head saying, this can't happen. This isn't real. This can't be happening. It can't happen to you. You're not special. This can't happen. It's not happening. But it was happening. And when that confirmation event happened, it was just like click, that like the tape got pulled out of my brain and just thrown out. And I had much calmer, clearer thoughts that weren't clouded up and tangled up in this kind of doubts.
Yeah.
And I was able to proceed forward. Didn't make life easy, right? I still had all kinds of challenges, but that I could proceed forward in a much cleaner, clearer way.
Acceptance, essentially, isn't it?
Acceptance. Yes, this is real. Again, I don't know what the source of the reality is, but something real is happening.
So that's your big takeaway from everything, is that you've now come to a point, you passed your therapy, haven't you? You've accepted, and now you're sort of like, you're on the journey properly now, sort of thing.
Well, I think struggling is part of the journey too. Yeah. So Luke Skywalker has to go to whatever that's planet, the swamp planet, and kind of like, so I can't raise the spaceship out of the swamp. So
why can't you raise the X-Wing out of the swamp?
Well,
what's wrong with you?
Yeah. So in a funny way, like, that's a metaphor, right? That's symbolic to do something magical like that. What I can say is I have written 4 books since 2015. So you stack those up, it's about 1,500 pages, maybe less than that, 1,400 pages of owls and UFOs. And I feel like each book has got a different flavor and a different tone. So I'm coming at it through different thoughts and stuff like that. And within those books, I don't care about if anyone believes in UFOs at the end of it. I don't care if anyone believes in the owl magic at the end of, or the owl connection, let's say. And what I do want to imbue is that we are living in a rich, multi-layered universe. We're trapped in this day-to-day grind, and then alongside us, parallel to us, is this other realm that can interact with us. And that's what I want to, I want the reader to come away that there is a deeper reality that we are connected with. And that's, yeah, the UFO is insignificant, the owl is insignificant, but that deeper realm that is parallel to us is, I think, is something we've lost as a society, and but it's still there, right there.
Just got to reach it. Perfect. Thank you for that one. Going to move slightly away from the big topics and the owls and UFOs and stuff. I asked this question of everybody, but you've already told me loads of strange things, to be fair, that people would class as strange. I always ask, what strange things have happened in your life? And it doesn't have to be a UFO. Obviously, it doesn't have to be anything else. It could be just a random weird person in your life at some point. What strange thing has happened to you?
Wow. Well, I mean, I wrote a memoir that lists a lot of strange things. So just one little strange story?
Yeah, just one random strange story, anything you want.
Okay, this is one that just seems so funny to me. So I have never told this one publicly, but it's just boom, it's the one that popped up.
Lush.
I was with this I was on a camping trip with this woman, and she was someone I knew. I interviewed her, Karis Melina Brown. And we were on a camping trip together. She had never gone camping, and I was like, "I'll take you camping in the in the Tetons." So we went in the Tetons, and what I often do, I'll lay down in under the stars. I'll say, "Okay, I do this little plea," and I'll say, like, "I am open and receptive to whatever you have to offer." Like, dear universe, I am open and receptive to whatever you have to offer, and I will. I'll work towards the highest good. And it's a little bit mushy and new agey, but it's been great. It's something that I feel like I've benefited from. And so, and it changes depending where my head's at the moment. So we're like on this flat rock in this beautiful spot in the Tetons. Actually, it'd be a few miles from where the owl and UFO thing happened. It was kind of the same neck of the woods in this big mountain range. Excuse me, it's where the owl and UFO. It's the owl thing that happened with Kristen. So
okay.
It was so. We lay there, and I said, okay, I started going through plea, like, dear universe, I am open and receptive to whatever you have to offer. And then she goes, look, and this big, so it's moonlight, it's perfect magical nighttime moonlight, this big thing just kind of like right at the edge of, like, we're kind of on a flat rock, and there's some trees and bushes, and this big thing goes boom, 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 boom. And I'm like, and we're like, oh God, boom, 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 boom. Our hearts are like, and so I'm like, she's like, what is it? And I was like, well, if it's far away, it's something big. And if it was close, it's something small. It's hard to tell in the moonlight, but whatever it is, something walked right through the camp in here. So, and the next morning, so that was funny. It was just funny. Well, we're not doing the plea now. So, but the next morning, like, I got up and there were baby bear tracks, like little cute, like, so it must've been a tiny little bear, like walked right through the mud right next to where we were planning to. So that was just funny to me that happened simultaneous. Like, I am open and receptive to whatever you have to offer. And so that real threat.
And that's what it served up for you. Yeah.
Yeah. Like instantaneously, like I basically had to stop my plea halfway through it. And like, oh, not doing the plea tonight. Okay, let's, whatever. Like, so, but we didn't know what it was until the sun came up and we could look at the footprints in the mud.
Yeah.
So that's a very small thing, but wow, I've got a lot of stories that that take longer to tell, let's say. So.
Sure. I like that one, though. It's a quirky one, isn't it? And it didn't have to go into the realm of completely paranormal or anything, did it? It was just a nice little...
Well, you ask a question, the universe gives you a response right away.
No. In whatever form that may take. Yeah. I like it. We are now entering the Koit zone. Koit zone!
Okay.
In the Koit zone, I'm going to ask you random questions, and you can give as much answers or as little as you want to give. All right, but they will be random. So, first question: chewing gum, yes or no?
No.
I'm also on that train. I hate the stuff. It's everywhere. Can't get rid of it. What's the crappiest theme park or museum, that sort of place, that you've ever been? The worst museum or theme park?
The Mystery Spot in Jackson Hole, Wyoming. It's not there anymore.
And what did that do?
It was like a fake house that was built crooked, and you would take pictures on the inside, and you would stand crooked and stuff like that. It was pretty cheesy.
Oh, I think I know the one you mean.
Yeah.
I might have seen that.
There's a bunch of them. They're all over the place.
Yeah.
So.
The mystery spot. Well, at least it's not there anymore, so no one could get had by that one. Conversely, the greatest theme park or museum or something like that you've ever visited.
Well, as a little kid, I wanted to design the rides at Disney World.
No, it'd be an Imagineer.
I was an illustrator and an Imagineer. Yes, I was I did animation when I was in New York City. So when you said you were an animator, I'm like, oh, cool. Yeah. I lived down the street from the not down the street. I lived in New York City for 10 years, and I had the Metropolitan Museum of Art right there. That's. I mean, I've never been to the Louvre, but I think that would be the only thing on earth that could compare.
See, I've been to the Louvre, but I've not been to the one you're mentioning.
Yeah.
There you go. Now, what? That's just thrown me now. Animation. What's that all about? What did you do?
Oh, I did illustration work in New York City, mostly pre-production for TV commercials. And I worked at an animation house called Broadcast Arts. You could probably look this up. And Broadcast Arts did a bunch of rock videos. I didn't work on the rock videos. They also did Pee-wee's Playhouse. I did not work on Pee-wee's Playhouse though, but I did it's not that exciting, but I did the pre-production animation for like the Honey Nut Cheerios Bee, and I did some animation where it was funny, they had already turned to computer generated animation for the M&Ms.
Yes, yeah, I know.
And they had the computer generated M&Ms watching a TV commercial from an M&M commercial from the early 1960s. So they had a low resolution. So anyway, I dipped my pen or dipped my brush in the India ink and did it on the acetate, like oldie timey.
Yeah.
And I animated a M&M commercial that the computer generated M&Ms like pointed at the TV and laughed at. So.
Lush, I love that. That's another little synchronicity. I do love animation. Best place you've ever been?
Well, there's some meadows in the Tetons that I would like. Basically, I want my ashes spread there, kind of places. Just super beautiful, peaceful places. That was my backyard. It was there's kind of the triumphant, magical, huge canyons that define the mountain range of the Tetons where I lived, and then there's some just gentle meadows that are off the beaten path that just my heart soars just to think about them. So,
a nice natural spot. I like that answer. Most famous person you've ever met?
Well, I mean, my favorite famous person I ever met was Fritz Weaver, and Fritz Weaver was an actor. I think he might still be alive. He's probably close to 100 years old, but last time I checked, he was still alive, and he was in a series of Twilight Zone episodes. He was like a actor that was in every, like he shows up all over the place in between like the early 60s and the 80s and 90s. But he was in a few of the classic Twilight Zones, where he played the prosecutor in one Twilight Zone where Burgess Meredith was on trial for having books. It's just wonderful.
And you met him?
I met him. Yes, I worked with him. I was doing TV commercials and stuff.
Yeah, makes sense.
Yeah, so
cool.
He was a voiceover guy for a TV commercial. So
I will look him up after because that's intrigued me as well. Fritz Weaver, right?
Just Twilight Zone. Look up the Twilight Zone. You'll see some clips of him. Yeah, he's great.
Probably one of those classic actors that like character actors that you always see but don't know the name.
Yeah.
Yeah. Toast. How do you have it done on a scale of bread to burnt?
Not burnt, just very barely crispy. Yeah, just at the point where it's just almost starting to.
Yeah, another good choice. Here's a strange one, and you don't have to give the answer if you don't want to, but if you can, cool. What's the closest you've ever been to death?
Oh, I was working as a mountaineering guide for 10 years, so I mean, I've been in all kinds of situations that were just one footstep away from death. I mean, you do that all. I mean, you make a left turn in traffic, you're one.
That's true.
Yeah, breath away from death and stuff like that. So, but I got very comfortable in that what's called it's called no fall terrain. Like you can get into it, but you can't fall. Like fall would be fatal. But you can we're gonna climb this thing, and we could put the rope in and we could have some safe. But it's like just on that edge. Yes. So I spent a decade of my life in no fall terrain. I don't know.
Yeah.
I mean, obviously not every minute of every day, but that
No.
was very
I
comfortable
don't
for
not.
me. So.
You're right with me going all the time. What special skill do you have?
Ooh, I'm trying to think. I mean, I'm a skilled illustrator. Um, I can draw. So you know what a Roman letters are,
Roman
right? So
numerals,
that
yeah.
no,
And letters.
not Roman numerals, like Times New Roman and Caslon,
Oh,
and
sorry. Yes,
like
yeah.
I can very accurately draw Roman letters without any reference at all.
There you are. It's an unusual but cool skill, nonetheless.
I thought of this for some reason. Yeah, it showed up. That was, so you asked, it was the first thing that popped
Yeah,
in.
no, that's fair. Often the first thing is what you should go with, isn't it? Instinct of the brain. I always find that if you watch a quiz show on TV, you know, the first thing that immediately comes to you is the answer normally, and people doubt themselves. Yeah. I'm going to throw in one more here, and we briefly talked before we started recording about bears. Have you ever had an experience with a bear where you thought, "Oh Christ, here we go"?
You know, I've gotten used to bears. The very first experience I had with a bear was like one of those, oh Christ experiences, where I was on horseback in right outside of Yellowstone National Park, and and we came around a corner, and I was on the second horse. I'm terrible on horses and stuff like that. So the guy in front of me was great on horses, young guy. And we came around a corner, and this grizzly bear like stood up on its hind legs.
Oh crikey!
And faced us down, and the horses got really scared.
I imagine.
And he was just, I could just see him like don't move horse, and he had a little dog with him, a little like a little cattle dog, like a sheepdog basically, a little teeny dog. And finally he said, "Get the bear." And the little dog chased the bear away. So, and I'll tell you what, so I was not really worried about, but yeah, so I've had a lot of face-to-face experiences with bears and big bears in Yellowstone and Alaska, grizzly bears and stuff close. And they'll walk away usually. So I've never had any experience except where they kind of look at you and then walk away. But I've had what bears do, grizzly bears. So bears have a very poor sense of sight, and they have an excellent sense of smell. So when a grizzly bear sees you and doesn't know what you are, like you come around a corner in a meadow,
yeah,
and then all of a sudden this grizzly bear is like you're walking towards it, and it's walking towards you, and then you like do the thing where you both like, it's surprised, you're surprised. The bear will instantly stand up on its hind legs, and it's like all of a sudden you're looking at this thing like that's 9 feet tall. You know, you're basically, it's like looking at the grizzly bear is the largest land predator on Earth. It's bigger than a tiger, it's bigger than a lion, it's the largest predator on Earth. So this thing that has big sharp teeth and claws is like standing above you 9 feet tall, and it just they've just turned around. I've talked to some people who've been attacked by grizzly bears, and so
death monsters they are.
Very unlikely. That when you look at the actual statistics, the statistics are low. Very few fatalities involving bears.
I know. I say this to my girlfriend. Is most in our country we don't have bears, but most things are killed by cows. If anything, you know.
Yeah, or bees. Actually, bees are the most.
Bees,
bees and mosquitoes are, you know, like carry disease and stuff. Like people have anaphylactic shock to bees, so bees are, depending on how you do the statistics, bees are the most dangerous animal in the world. So.
Didn't know that about bees. That's interesting. Right,
well, people, if you have an allergy to bees,
a
bee sting can be fatal. So, as opposed to, you know, but yeah. So, but bears are beautiful. I love the bears, and I love being in a wild environment. Let me tell you, like camping in a place where there's a 9 foot tall predator is a whole lot different than camping in a place like, you know, like Scotland, let's say.
Yeah, oh God, yeah. We've got nothing here that will really kill you. We've got an adder that might give you a bite. Yeah. I live in the Cotswolds, and there's adders around here, but you don't really ever see them. So we can walk and hike safely. I told you earlier I'm coming over to Port Angeles very soon, and bears do worry me. So I really hope I don't see one, but I also kind of wish I do. You know what I mean?
Bears. So the Olympic National Park is right there near Port Angeles. It's not quite the gateway city. Wait a minute, Port Angeles is the gateway city. Yeah, you'll be right there. Oh yeah, you know what? What time? When are you coming?
In a couple of weeks, I think.
You're going to see bears. Oh, the bears! The place is crawling with bears. I saw 9 bears.
Hungry
in one
ones,
day.
yeah.
I saw 9 bears in one day in the Olympics. Yeah,
God.
in the autumn they're out. So in the autumn there's berries everywhere. The bears are happy. The black bears, they're black bears. They're essentially big cute squirrels. So don't they're like adorable. Yeah. So and they see people all the time, and there's no rules as far as carrying bear spray and anything like that. They do request you take care of your food and keep it in like a hard-sided container. So
I have been practicing, hey bear, because you see that a lot.
and I had to teach that to people too. I'm against saying hey bear, because then when you do see a bear, then someone says, oh bear. And then it's like, well, wait, is that the hey bear or is that like a bear? So I said, we were saying hey Elvis. That's all right. But then if Elvis shows up, then
you're in trouble.
Really, Elvis? Yeah, is that really? Yeah. Did you really see Elvis? So.
He's 10 feet tall, I think, when he stands up on his own leg.
Yeah. His hair is an extra 4 feet tall. So
that's right. Right, we are now exiting the Koit zone, and there's just 2 more questions left. So I will say, what else do you like to do in your downtime? Any activities or guilty pleasures? Now I can tell that you're an outdoorsman. Anything besides outdoors that you like to do?
Wow, that's a tough one. It's rough to tell. So I was because I was going to say, well, I like to research UFOs and owls, and I'm like, yeah, we kind of covered that. And I was like, I have been working on a form. I'm going to go right to you told me I can't say it, but that's the only thing that's coming to mind right now. I wrote a book on lightweight backpacking, and I did a lot of lightweight backpacking. I was doing a lot of stuff with heavy packs, these long, ambitious trips that I was doing out west. And then I started getting into light backpacking. So I enjoy going into the woods with as little as I can possibly carry, and that safety would allow. So you should be able to hold your backpack up with your little finger for a multi-day trip. So,
and that means you can harvest water while you're out as well, I assume.
Oh yeah, there's plenty of water. North Cascades where I live right now, and there's like, oh my God, there's water squirting out of everything, and the water's clean, so I just tend to drink it right out of the streams and stuff like that. So
I was gonna say I've got one of those. I don't know if you've ever seen it. Those life straws.
Oh yeah, you won't need it in the. Don't bring your life straw to the Olympic Peninsula. So
no, I'll leave that at home then. Save some room in the suitcase. And the last question, and it's kind of crossed over, which is, what are you currently working on? Your book.
Well, I'm just about to start a audiobook. So I wrote a novel, and I'm going to read the novel. And so I have a little booth that I'm going to be traveling through part of August, and then I'll be sitting down in a booth with this microphone reading. I'm terrible at reading aloud. So I have to like read every sentence like 3 times, it feels like sometimes, just to get so it flows out right. So I'll be doing the audio reading of my novel. Perfect.
Mike, let's leave it there. I want to say thanks ever so much for coming on. It's been a pleasure talking to you. I've learned a great deal, and you've added to my puzzle. You know, you're another piece to that.
Thank you so much. It's been an honor.
To watch other episodes of KoitCast, or indeed animations I've made, click the image top middle. Click the image top left to download some of my songs, and click the image top right to subscribe to my channel. And make sure you tick that notification bell so you never miss an upload.